My name is Maria Oliveira, and everything I have in this life, I built with my own hands. There was no rich husband, no family inheritance, no easy road. Just me, my strength, and my son, Lucas Oliveira. From the day he was born, he became my reason for waking up, my reason for fighting, my reason for never giving up even when life tried to break me. I remember holding him as a baby, promising him that he would never feel the pain I felt growing up with nothing. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, just to make sure he had a good school, clean clothes, and a warm meal every night. I missed sleep, I missed rest, but I never missed being his mother. Lucas was my pride. Everyone in the neighborhood knew how much I loved that boy. He was kind, respectful, and always close to me. When he succeeded, I felt like I had succeeded. When he smiled, my whole world felt complete. For years, it was just the 2 of us in that house, the same house I worked years to pay off. Every wall, every chair, every small detail carried my sacrifice. That house was not just a building, it was my story. And Lucas knew that. Or at least, I thought he did. Everything started to change the day he brought her into our lives. Her name was Camila Rocha. The first time I saw her, she smiled, but something in her eyes did not feel right. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just being protective. After all, Lucas was growing up. He had the right to choose who he loved. I welcomed her into my home with respect because I trusted my son. But slowly, things began to shift in ways I could not ignore. Lucas stopped sitting with me during dinner. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped noticing the little things he used to care about. Instead, everything became about Camila. Her opinions, her comfort, her presence. At first, it was small things. She would suggest changes in the house. She would complain about how things were arranged. She would make comments that sounded polite but carried disrespect underneath. I stayed quiet. I told myself it was not worth creating problems. But silence can sometimes invite more disrespect. One evening, I came home from work, tired and hoping for peace, only to find Camila in my kitchen, rearranging things like she owned the place. I paused at the door, watching her move confidently, like she had already claimed everything. Lucas stood beside her, laughing, completely unaware of how wrong it felt. I asked calmly what was going on, and before Lucas could even speak, Camila answered. She said she was just making the space more comfortable. Comfortable for who? I wondered. That was the first moment I felt something break inside me. But I still said nothing. I still chose peace. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between me and my son grew wider. He no longer looked at me the same way. The respect in his voice started to disappear. The house that once felt warm began to feel cold. And the worst part was not Camila's behavior. It was Lucas allowing it. It was Lucas choosing not to see my pain. One night, everything reached a point I could not ignore. I walked past the guest room, the same room I had always kept ready for visitors, and I noticed the door was closed. That was strange. I opened it slowly, and what I saw made my heart drop. Camila had moved her things into that room. Clothes in the closet. Shoes on the floor. Makeup on the dresser. It was no longer a guest room. It had become her room. In my house. Without my permission. I stood there in silence, trying to understand how things had gone this far. When I asked Lucas about it, his response changed everything. He did not apologize. He did not explain with respect. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Mom, it's not a big deal. She's going to be here anyway." That sentence hit harder than anything I had ever felt. Not a big deal? My home, my rules, my sacrifices, reduced to not a big deal. In that moment, I realized something painful. I was no longer the priority in my son's life. He had made his choice. And it was not me. I did not shout. I did not cry in front of them. I simply nodded and walked away, but inside, Something powerful was rising. A quiet strength. A decision forming. Because I understood one thing clearly that night. If my son could choose someone else over me in my own house, then I also had the right to make my own choice. And my choice would change everything. If you are enjoying this story, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it with others. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. End. The change did not happen in one day. It came slowly, like a quiet storm that builds before it destroys everything in its path. After that night, I began to see my home with new eyes. It no longer felt like a place of comfort. It felt like a place where I had to watch every step, measure every word, and prepare myself for the next disappointment. Camila Rocha was no longer acting like a guest. She moved freely, confidently, like the house belonged to her. She woke up late, walked into the kitchen without greeting me, and used everything without asking. At first, I thought maybe she would adjust, maybe she would learn respect with time. But instead, her behavior only grew stronger, bolder, and more disrespectful. She started making decisions in my home as if I did not exist. She changed the arrangement of the living room furniture. She replaced the curtains I had chosen years ago. She even started inviting her friends over without asking me. And each time I looked at Lucas Oliveira, hoping he would say something, he stayed silent or, worse, he supported her. One evening, I came back from work earlier than usual. I opened the door and heard loud laughter coming from the living room. When I stepped inside, I saw Camila and two of her friends sitting comfortably, eating and drinking, as if they were in a hotel. My furniture, my space, my peace, all taken over. Camila looked at me and gave a quick smile, not even standing up to greet me. One of her friends asked her quietly, "Who is that?" And Camila answered, "Oh, that's Lucas's mom." That sentence cut deep. Not, "This is her house," not, "This is Mrs. Oliveira," just, Lucas's mom, like I was a stranger in my own home. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of disrespect pressing on my chest. I wanted to speak, to correct her, to remind everyone that this house belonged to me. But again, I held myself back. I walked past them and went straight to my room, closing the door gently, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about everything I had sacrificed for Lucas. Every late night, every struggle, every tear. And now, in return, I was being reduced to nothing in my own home. But the real breaking point came a few days later. It was a quiet afternoon. I was sitting in the living room when Camila walked in and stood in front of me with a serious expression. She did not greet me. She did not show respect. She simply spoke. She said, "Maria, I think it would be better if you gave us more space. Lucas and I need privacy." I looked at her, trying to understand if I had heard her correctly. More space? In my house? Before I could respond, Lucas walked in and stood beside her. And instead of correcting her, instead of defending me, he supported her. He said, "Mom, she's right. Things would be easier if you didn't interfere so much." Interfere? That word echoed in my mind. I, who built everything, who gave everything, was now being told that I was interfering in my own home. I felt something shift inside me. This was no longer small disrespect. This was something bigger. Something intentional. Something that could not be ignored anymore. I stood up slowly, looked at both of them, and for the first time, I allowed my silence to carry weight. I did not argue. I did not shout. I simply said, "I understand." But what they did not understand was that my words did not mean acceptance. They meant realization. That evening, I walked through my house, touching the walls, remembering the journey it took to build this life. I remembered the days I went without food so Lucas could eat. I remembered the nights I stayed awake worrying about his future. And now, I was being pushed aside like I no longer mattered. But something inside me refused to break. Instead, it grew stronger. Calm. Focused. Certain. I realized that respect is not something you beg for. It is something you demand through your actions. And if people choose to forget your value, you remind them in a way they will never forget. From that day, I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to fix what was already broken. I observed. I listened. I prepared. Because I knew one thing for sure. This situation would not continue the way it was. There would be a change. A serious one. And when that change came, it would not be loud or emotional. It would be quiet, calculated, and final. Because sometimes, the strongest response is not in what you say, but in what you decide to do next. End. The day everything truly broke did not begin with shouting or anger. It began quietly, like any other day, but I could feel something heavy in the air. I woke up early, as I always did, and sat alone in the kitchen. The silence that once brought me peace now felt cold and unfamiliar. This house, the same house I had built with years of sacrifice, no longer felt like mine. It felt like I was slowly being pushed out, step by step, until there would be nothing left of me inside it. I held my cup of tea and thought about the past, about the little boy Lucas Oliveira used to be. The boy who would run to me after school, who would hug me tightly and say, "Mom, you're my everything." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to hold on to that memory, but when I opened them, reality stood in front of me. The boy I raised was gone, and in his place was a man I barely recognized. Later that morning, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Camila Rocha walked into the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, not even looking at me. She opened the fridge, took what she wanted, and closed it without a word. No greeting, no respect, nothing. A few seconds later, Lucas walked in. I looked at him, hoping, just for a moment, that he would see me, that he would remember who I was to him. But he didn't. He walked straight to Camila, kissed her on the cheek, and smiled like I was invisible. That moment hurt more than any insult. Being ignored in your own home is a different kind of pain. I decided that I could not stay silent anymore. Not after everything that had been building inside me. I spoke calmly, but my voice carried weight. I said, "Lucas, we need to talk." He sighed, already showing irritation, as if I was a burden. Camila crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, watching, like she was waiting for a show. I asked him a simple question. "Do you respect me?" He looked at me, confused, then slightly annoyed. He said, "Mom, why are you being like this?" I did not raise my voice. I did not change my tone. I repeated the question. "Do you respect me?" There was a pause. A long one. And in that silence, I got my answer before he even spoke. When he finally did, his words were not what I expected, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. He said, "I respect you, but things are different now. You need to understand that Camila is part of my life. You can't expect everything to stay the same." I nodded slowly. I understood that things change. I understood that people grow. But respect should never disappear. I looked at him and asked one more question. "And where do I fit in your life now?" This time, he did not hesitate. He said, "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. If you can't accept Camila, then maybe you're the problem." Those words landed heavily. Not because they were loud, but because they were final. In that moment, something inside me shut down completely. The hope I had been holding on to disappeared. The belief that my son would come back to his senses faded away. I realized that this was no longer confusion. This was a choice. And he had made it clearly. Camila smiled slightly, a quiet, satisfied smile, like she had won something. And maybe she had. But what she didn't understand was that this was not the end of the story. This was the turning point. I stood there for a moment, looking at both of them. I saw who they had become, and I accepted it. Not with pain, not with anger, but with clarity. I said nothing more. I turned around and walked away, leaving them in the kitchen. Behind me, I could hear Camila whisper something, followed by a soft laugh. But it no longer affected me the same way. Because something had changed inside me. I walked into my room, closed the door, and sat down quietly. I did not cry. I did not break. Instead, I thought. Clearly. Calmly. Powerfully. I replayed everything that had happened, every moment of disrespect, every word, every action. And I understood one thing with complete certainty. I had been too patient. Too understanding. Too silent. And in doing so, I had allowed them to believe that I had no limits. But that was about to change. Respect is not given to those who stay silent forever. It is given to those who know when to act. And I was ready to act. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of truth. Because if my son could stand in front of me and tell me that I was the problem in my own home, then he needed to learn what it truly meant to lose what he had taken for granted. That afternoon, I made a decision. A quiet one. A powerful one. A decision that would not just change my life, but his as well. And once that decision was made, there was no going back. And the decision I made that afternoon did not come from anger. It came from clarity. For the first time in a long time, my mind was calm, my heart was steady, and my vision was clear. I was no longer reacting to pain. I was responding to truth. That truth was simple. I had allowed disrespect to grow in my own home, and now it was time to correct it in a way that could not be ignored or reversed. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, just the way it used to be before everything changed. I prepared myself without rushing. There was no hesitation in me anymore. I dressed neatly, looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in weeks, I saw strength instead of sadness. I saw a woman who had sacrificed everything and who was finally ready to protect what she had built. Without saying a word to anyone, I picked up my bag and left the house. Lucas Oliveira and Camila Rocha were still asleep, unaware that this day would change everything for them. I drove across town with one clear destination in mind. The office of Dr. Ricardo Mendez. He had handled important matters for me before, and I trusted him completely. When I arrived, I did not sit in the waiting area for long. As soon as he saw me, he welcomed me into his office with respect. He noticed immediately that something was different about me. He asked if everything was all right. I looked at him calmly and said, "I need to update my will." There was no emotion in my voice, no anger, no hesitation. Just certainty. He nodded and asked me to explain what changes I wanted to make. I took a deep breath, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what I was about to do. I said, "I want to remove my son, Lucas Oliveira, from my will completely." The room fell silent for a moment. He looked at me carefully, making sure I understood the seriousness of my decision. He asked if I was certain. I did not need time to think. I had already done that. I said, "Yes. I am certain." Then I explained everything. Not with emotion, not with complaints, but with facts. I told him about the disrespect, the changes in my home, the way I had been treated as if I no longer mattered. I told him how my son had chosen someone else over me, not just in words, but in actions. And most importantly, I told him that this decision was not about punishment. It was about principle. About value. About teaching a lesson that words could no longer teach. He listened carefully and then began preparing the documents. As I sat there watching him work, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not sadness, not regret, but peace. Because for the first time, I was taking control of my life again. I was no longer waiting for respect. I was demanding it through action. When the documents were ready, he placed them in front of me. He explained every detail, every change, making sure everything was clear and legally solid. My assets, my house, everything I had worked for, would no longer go to Lucas. Instead, I chose to leave everything to a foundation that supports women who struggle the way I once did. Women who work hard, who sacrifice, who deserve a chance to build something better. Because if my own son could not value what I built, then someone else would. I picked up the pen and looked at the paper for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood that this was the final step. Once I signed, there would be no going back. I thought about Lucas as a child, about the love I had for him, about everything we had been through together. And then I thought about the man he had become, the choices he had made, the way he had treated me. And with that clarity, I signed. Slowly. Firmly. Finally. In that moment, something inside me settled. The decision was complete. The line had been drawn. Dr. Mendez witnessed the signature and secured the documents. He looked at me and said, "You have done what you believe is right." I nodded, because that was the truth. I did not leave his office feeling heavy. I left feeling strong. Certain. Free. When I stepped outside, the sun felt warmer, the air felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I returned home later that day, and everything looked the same on the outside. But inside, everything was different. I walked through the door and saw Lucas and Camila sitting together, laughing, completely unaware of what had just happened. They looked at me briefly, then continued their conversation like I was just passing by. But this time, I did not feel hurt. I did not feel ignored. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that the power had shifted. And they would soon understand that actions have consequences. Not loud consequences. Not emotional consequences. But real, lasting ones. I walked past them calmly and went to my room, closing the door behind me. I sat down and allowed myself a moment of silence. Not to think, not to question, but simply to acknowledge what I had done. I had chosen myself. I had chosen respect. And from that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same again. End. The truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how long it is hidden. Days passed after I signed the papers, and life in the house continued as if nothing had changed. Lucas Oliveira and Camila Rocha moved freely, laughing, making plans, living comfortably. In a space they believed was already theirs. They did not notice the difference in me. They did not see that I no longer reacted, no longer questioned, no longer tried to fix anything. I had become quiet, but not weak. I had become calm, but not powerless. I was simply waiting for the right moment, because I knew that when the truth finally came out, it would speak louder than any argument ever could. That moment came sooner than they expected. One afternoon, Lucas walked into the house holding an envelope. I was sitting in the living room, reading quietly. He looked confused, almost uneasy. He said my name in a tone I had not heard in a long time. "Mom, what is this?" I looked up slowly, already knowing what he was holding. The official documents had been delivered. The truth had arrived. I closed my book gently and said, "Open it." He hesitated for a second, then tore the envelope open and began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression changed. Confusion turned into shock. Shock turned into disbelief. And then, slowly, disbelief turned into something deeper. Fear. This must be a mistake," he said, his voice no longer confident. "Why is my name not here?" Camila stepped closer, trying to read over his shoulder. Her face tightened as she realized what the document was saying. I stood up calmly, my posture straight, my voice steady. "There is no mistake," I said. "I made that decision myself." Lucas looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. "You removed me? From everything?" I nodded. "Yes." The room became silent. The same house that had been filled with their laughter now held a heavy, undeniable truth. Lucas ran his hand through his hair, pacing slightly, trying to understand what was happening. "But, why would you do this?" he asked, his voice now softer, uncertain. That question did not deserve anger. It deserved honesty. I looked at him and said, "Because you made your choice. And now I have made mine. Camila stepped forward, her tone sharp, trying to take control of the situation. This is not fair. He's your son. You can't just do this because of small issues. I turned to her, not with anger, but with clarity. This was not a small issue. This was about respect. And respect is never small. Lucas's voice broke slightly as he spoke again. Mom, you could have talked to me. I held his gaze and answered, I did talk to you. Many times. You just chose not to listen. Those words hit harder than anything else I could have said. Because they were true. There was no argument left to make, no excuse strong enough to erase what had already been done. He stood there, holding the paper, realizing the weight of his actions. For the first time in a long time, I saw something in his eyes that had been missing. Not pride. Not confidence. But regret. Real, deep regret. But regret does not erase consequences. And that is a lesson many people learn too late. He took a step closer to me, his voice quieter now. Can we fix this? I paused for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted him to understand the truth fully. Some things can be fixed, I said. But some things change people forever. I walked past him slowly, not to leave, but to show him that the conversation was no longer about control. It was about understanding. About growth. About truth. Camila remained silent now, her confidence gone, replaced by uncertainty. Because for the first time, she understood that this was not her house, not her power, not her decision. And Lucas finally understood that what he had taken for granted was never guaranteed. Days later, the house felt different. Quieter. Not because of tension, but because of realization. Lucas began to change. Not quickly, not perfectly, but slowly. He started to see me again. To greet me. To listen. But I did not rush to forgive, and I did not reverse my decision. Because respect is not built in one moment. It is built over time. And trust, once broken, must be earned again. I did not remove him from my life. I removed him from my will. And those are two very different things. Because love can remain, even when boundaries are set. And sometimes, the strongest form of love is the one that teaches the hardest lesson. I stood one evening by the window, looking out at the same world I had always known, but feeling stronger than I ever had before. I had not lost my son. I had found my strength. And that made all the difference. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it with others. And in the comment section, tell me where you are watching from. End.